Picture this. You are sitting by a fire at the edge of the last ice age. No phone, no screen, no sound but the wind and the crack of burning wood. Just your hands, a small pile of bone fragments, and hours of darkness still ahead of you. Somewhere out past the firelight, a glacier is still retreating. The world is colder, emptier, and far more dangerous than the one you know. What do you do with your hands when there is nothing else to do? If you are anything like the people who lived here nearly 13,000 years ago, you pick up those bone fragments and you throw them. Because it turns out, the urge to gamble, to roll something and wait for the outcome, is not a modern habit at all. It goes back roughly 12,800 years to the tail end of the Ice Age itself. Today, games of chance are everywhere. Casinos lit up like spaceships. Phones buzzing with slot machine apps. Family board games with little plastic dice that roll across the kitchen table and somehow always land under the couch. Friday night poker games. Lottery tickets bought on a whim. A coin flip to decide who takes out the trash. We tend to think of all this as a fairly recent invention. Something that came with cities, with money, with bored teenagers and neon signs. Historians used to agree with that instinct. For a long time, the story was that dice and gambling were an old-world idea, born somewhere in the ancient civilizations of the Middle East. Textbooks credited early Mesopotamian and Indus Valley societies with the concept, treating it as a product of cities, trade routes, and organized economies. It fit a broader assumption a lot of people still carry, that anything resembling structured thought, strategy, or leisure had to wait for civilization to show up first. But new archaeological research says otherwise. It says the instinct to create randomness, to build an object whose outcome you cannot control, was already fully formed before humans had even invented farming. Before writing. Before the wheel. Before anyone had planted a single crop on purpose. Someone was already shaping a piece of bone specifically so they could not predict how it would land. Let's get into the evidence, because it is genuinely remarkable. In April of 2026, a study published in the journal American Antiquity turned the known history of gaming upside down. The research was led by Robert Madden, a doctoral student at Colorado State University. He examined artifacts from 57 archaeological sites, spread across 12 different states. To even begin the study, Madden had to design a strict set of criteria. A checklist a bone fragment had to pass before it could be called a die instead of just a tool. Out of everything he studied using that checklist, he identified over 600 objects that fit the criteria for dice. 565 of them were confirmed. 94 more were probable. The oldest ones came from Folsom period sites in Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. Folsom culture belonged to highly mobile hunter-gatherers, famous among archaeologists for a distinctive, finely made stone spear point used to hunt large Ice Age game. These particular dice were dated to somewhere between 12,800 and 12,200 years ago. One possible example, tied to the even earlier Clovis culture, may be as old as 13,000 years. 12,800 years. Just let that number actually sit for a second, because it's easy to say and much harder to picture. Now, these were nothing like the six-sided cubes sitting in your board game closet. Researchers call them binary lots. Flat or slightly rounded, oval or rectangular pieces of bone or wood, small enough to hold in one hand. Each one had two distinct sides. One side was marked, carved, burned, or painted. The other was left plain. Players would toss a handful of them at once, the way you might flip a coin. Then they would count how many landed with the marked side facing up, scoring the round based on that count. And here is the detail that really lands. These artifacts predate the previously accepted origin of dice by more than 6,000 years. Historians had placed the birth of dice in Bronze Age societies of Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley around 5,500 years ago. For decades, dice and probability were treated as an old-world invention, something Europeans and Middle Eastern civilizations came up with first. This discovery says the opposite. And it doesn't just push the timeline back a little. It pushes it back by more than double. It's worth pausing on that. An idea historians spent decades treating as settled fact just got rewritten by a pile of bone fragments that had been sitting in storage the entire time. So here is a fair question. If these objects are that old, why are we only hearing about this now? The answer is almost as interesting as the discovery itself. For a long time, these flat, unassuming pieces of bone sat quietly in museum drawers, misidentified. Imagine an archaeologist decades ago pulling open a storage drawer, picking up a thin oval sliver of bone, and setting it right back down as just another scraper. Researchers examined specimens held at the Smithsonian Institution, the University of Wyoming Archaeological Repository, and the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. Many had simply been cataloged as tools, ornaments, or unidentified worked bone, sitting unlabeled for generations. Nobody was looking for dice, so for a very long time, nobody found them. It makes sense, in a way. If you are trained to expect six-sided cubes with dots on them, a flat oval sliver of bone does not exactly scream game piece. And this points to something bigger. Most ancient games probably used materials that barely survive at all. Dirt, seeds, shells, sticks. Bone breaks down faster than stone tools and would almost never survive more than a few centuries, let alone thousands of years. Which means what Madden found is very likely just a small surviving fraction of how much these people actually played. Before we go further, if a video like this is the kind of thing you want more of, hit subscribe now. This channel exists to bring you research the moment it's published, not recycled trivia you've already seen a dozen times elsewhere. We're new, but we're not casual about it. Subscribing means you'll be here for the next one. Now, the deeper question. Why would Ice Age hunter-gatherers spend their time and effort crafting objects meant purely to produce a random result? Their lives depended on hunting, tracking, and finding enough food before winter closed in. This wasn't idle behavior. It cost real time and real material. Madden's research points towards something social. He found that these dice tend to show up in what he calls liminal spaces. Places where different, highly mobile groups would cross paths, often people who did not see each other very often, at the edges of their territory. His theory is that dice games worked as a kind of social technology, an icebreaker built out of bone. A way for strangers to sit down together, size each other up, and interact without the tension of a first meeting. Through that shared game, groups could trade goods, share information, or even find partners, all without a single shared language necessarily standing in the way. Folsome people, in particular, were known to travel long distances for prized, exotic materials like flint and chalcedony, a fine-grained variety of quartz. A friendly game of chance, staged at a meeting point between two traveling groups, may have been the door that opened those exchanges. To be fair to the science here, Madden is careful not to overclaim. He is not arguing that Ice Age humans understood formal probability theory the way a mathematician does today. What he does argue is that they were intentionally creating objects built to produce random outcomes and using those outcomes inside repeatable, rule-based games. It's a distinction worth making. Not sudden genius, just steady, repeated human curiosity about chance, tested again and again around a fire. There's also a fascinating open question the study raises. Historical records of 131 documented Native American dice games show that the vast majority, around 81%, were played exclusively by women. Whether that pattern reaches all the way back to these Ice Age origins is something researchers are still trying to figure out. It's a genuinely open question, and Madden himself says more research is needed before anyone can answer it with confidence. Either way, it complicates the old image of the Ice Age hunter-gatherer as a purely grim, survival-only existence, with nothing but the next kill on their mind. There was clearly room in that life for connection, for humor, for the simple pleasure of not knowing what happens next. So let's zoom out. What does all of this actually tell us? It tells us that the desire to play, to take a risk, to hand a decision over to chance just to see what happens, is not something civilization invented. It is something civilization inherited. Every time you shuffle a deck of cards, roll a die in a board game, or flip a coin to settle an argument, you are repeating an act that predates the pyramids. It predates written language. It predates agriculture itself. It survived the end of an ice age, the rise and fall of entire civilizations, and every single human generation in between. Empires have come and gone. Languages have been born and forgotten entirely. And, through all of it, people kept picking up something small, throwing it, and waiting to see what happened. One researcher not involved in the study, Robert Weiner of Dartmouth College, called this the most exciting paper he has seen in North American archaeology in at least the last 5 years. That is not a small statement in a field built on careful, cautious language, where most claims get hedged 3 times over. It suggests this isn't a minor footnote. It's a genuine rewrite of how early humans in North America actually lived, thought, and connected with one another. So the next time you roll a die, flip a coin, or draw a card, take a second to sit with that. You are doing something people were already doing long before cities, long before farming, long before a single word was ever written down. They didn't have screens. They didn't have casinos. They didn't even have the wheel yet. They didn't know what a city was or what money would eventually become. What they had was a few pieces of bone, a fire, and each other. And somehow, that was enough to build one of the oldest games humans have ever played, one that still gets played, in one form or another, every single day. 12,800 years later, we haven't outgrown it. We've just changed what the bone looks like. So here's what I'm curious about. Do you think this was really gambling in the sense we'd recognize today, or do you think it was closer to simple play? And which ancient game do you think you'd have actually been good at? Let me know in the comments.